Hold on, is that Multicam? Desert tricolor in the Gulf War? West German backpacks? What the heck do they got our troops wearing in the Call of Duty Black Ops 6 campaign? So to preface this, I'm not actually a big gearhead. I don't know a ton about gears. You know, I'm not a reenactor or anything like that. I have learned a lot more with my channel, just trying to find things to get my LARP suit right. And when I played Black Ops 6, I decided, you know, I looked at it and I said, hey, that looks pretty good, but I want to know exactly what they're wearing. Because no one has that information out there. Is it correct to what they were to actually been wearing during the Gulf War? You know, these answers weren't available online, so I decided that I was going to be the guy to go put a little research together and try to find out exactly what they're wearing. If you're not familiar with Black Ops 6, it's essentially a game about a lesbian working through her childhood trauma to stop nukes from going off.
Mommy needs you to stay in your room.
This all happens essentially during the Gulf War. The first one, that is, the good one. So a little bit of backstory. In 1990, Saddam Hussein, our favorite dictator from the Middle East, he was in a war with Iran for like 8 years and he was in a ton of debt. Most of that debt was owed to Kuwait. And he decided that the way to pay that debt off and to put Iraq in a better state would be to invade Kuwait. That would both eliminate the debt and it would give him access to oil and make him infinitely rich. An infinite money glitch in real life. So we decided to invade, and then everybody got really sad. And by everybody, I mean the US and all these European nations, as well as a ton of Arab nations as well.
This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor.
There were concerns that he might go into Saudi Arabia next, and you know that we can't allow them to take that oil. So the coalition got mad, everybody disavowed him, kind of like in Civ 6, whenever you do something bad, you go to war, and everyone and their mom starts to disavow you and stops trading with you. That's pretty much what happened to old Saddam. Coalition is formed with America, England, a whole bunch of other European nations and Arab nations, and bombing campaigns start to try and deter Saddam from doing what he's doing. So he decides to launch some Soviet-made SCUDs at Israel. The reason he decides to do this is because he believes that if he can get Israel involved in the war, that he can get Arab support around the region and it can become a Arab versus coalition sort of battle. Israel takes a few hit markers and then the US says, hey, we know what he's trying to do, so just chill out. We'll give you $1 gazillion and some Patriot missiles and you guys can just chill out. And that's exactly what we did. So Israel did not strike and they decided to just sit it out and shoot down the incoming SCUDs from Iraq or Kuwait, wherever he was launching from. I guess he was launching them from both. The response to this is Delta Force, along with the British SAS, decide to go drive a bunch of quads around the desert and find these SCUDs and blow them up. And they are just driving around the desert, shooting Iraqis, blowing up missile trucks. And that's where the mission for Black Ops 6 comes into play. In the campaign, it doesn't really matter. All you gotta know is that you are a guy who is disguising himself as Delta Force, and he's working with the British SAS to eliminate some SCUDs, because I guess the SAS can get you into Saddam's palace that you need to get into so you can do something. You can help the lesbian battle through her childhood trauma. The British commander, whoever of the SAS, tells you, hey, you need to go around this map, go find the SCUDs, and find anybody else that is around the area. Oh, and by the way, a Delta Force helicopter went down somewhere in the region. So you suit up and you get into your little truck with your friends, you head out to the desert, and the first thing that I found was a Delta Force helicopter crashed. There's 3 Delta guys and they're holding off a bunch of Iraqis. Hey, what you got there?
Only the latest technology from Handy Prints.
Whoa, what is it?
You have kill flashes, cheek risers, and stands.
Wait, 3D like the glasses?
Exactly like the glasses.
No way!
That's tight.
So the first piece of kit that caught my eye was the Desert Night Camo overcoats and the Desert Tricolor pants. Desert Night Camo, you may have seen this on Instagram. It's kind of a cool, tactical, hipster sort of camo pattern. It's popular in the civilian world. There are some companies domestically and in China that make this camo. You can buy it on Amazon in different kinds of jackets and button-up shirts, everything like that. The original Desert Night Camo was issued for the first time in the Gulf War, and it consisted of an overcoat, some overpants, and a boonie from what I could, from the research that I found. This would go over the 6-color DBDU uniform that the troops were wearing at the time, or the chocolate chip 6-color. So they would wear that, and I think you could even put like a liner inside of that jacket so that you could be a little bit warmer. Now, the actual camouflage pattern of DNC was developed sometime after Vietnam. Had a hard time kind of finding exactly when. The idea behind it was that the grid pattern of the camouflage would cancel out with the generated camouflage of Russian night vision from like the 70s. By the time that it was issued to the troops, it was pretty much obsolete already. We don't even know if it really worked with Russian night vision to begin with, but comparing it with American PBS5s, the desert chocolate chip uniform blended in better than the desert night camo outfit. It pretty much only served to keep the troops warm. Now the pants, DCU. You may look at this and say that's completely incorrect. Chocolate chip is what would have been worn. DCU is more of an Iraq thing, or even like a Black Hawk Down era sort of uniform. And the reality is yes, from the reference photos I looked of actual Delta Force during the SCUD hunting missions, it looked like they were wearing chocolate chip for the most part. There's even a guy I looked up who's an airsofter. He did like a blog post, I'll tag below, and he tried to put a little Delta Force uniform together, and he ended up doing with the chocolate chip based off of the research that he did in the photos. So I trust that guy. And he also kind of looks like Hop. Now, DCU being in the game actually isn't 100% anachronistic though, because it did exist. For a little bit of backstory on DCU, you kind of got to talk about the 6-color chocolate chip. The US decided, hey, if we got this whole thing with Russia going on during the Cold War, if we have to do battle in the Middle East on Israel's behalf, then we need to have a desert uniform to represent that. And that's when 6-color DBDU chocolate chip uniform, was invented. Used a little bit in some stuff before the Gulf War. I think there was an Operation Shadowhawk. I think it was like some sort of training exercise that uniform was used, as well as a few other experimental uniforms. And it was kind of figured out that DBDU wasn't the greatest pattern. It had 6 colors, had black in it. It kind of stood out. It was mainly for rocky environments, and it wasn't really being encountered. So Natick Laboratories decided to make a whole bunch of new camos, and that's where DCU came from. And it was implemented in very small numbers in the Gulf War. Mostly generals had it. Norman Schwarzkopf had like an M65 field jacket, and he got issued a uniform like later on, towards the end of the war. Some Air Force guys had it, and it was issued to a few units here and there. So it's not entirely, it's possible that you could make that argument, okay, this particular Delta unit got to wear DCU. Did it actually happen? I don't know, but it's not totally anachronistic. And I think that what they did that for the game just because they wanted to show that Delta stands out a little bit, and they're not just wearing chocolate chip like everybody else. So I can kind of understand from a maybe storytelling perspective. People like to make a lot of anachronistic excuses in the Black Ops games. For example, the original Black Ops with the Troy rear sight, for example, and the flat top commando, flat top, we talked about this before. People be like, well, you don't know, it's a experimental, you're in the Black Ops, anything goes. They could have access to special things, but it's like, we know that they didn't though. We have, it's all declassified now. We know that Troy was, I don't know how old he is, but he was likely a baby. So it's very unlikely that he was gonna be developing flip up rear sights for troops in Vietnam. I think the Troy rear sight came out in the early 2000s. So that's just a complete oversight by the game developers. Now, as far as boots go, I'll talk about this real quick. Jungle boots, that's what they're wearing in the game. Pretty accurate, that's what they wore during the Gulf War. These have the green fabric. The black fabric was issued kind of like mid-late 80s to early 90s, but it's not, there's still plenty of photos out there of guys wearing the green fabric jungle boots. So they're actually modeled pretty well in the game. So, hey, good job there. Now, where things start to get a little bit interesting would be the chest rig. Upon initially playing the game, I didn't look super extensively at the kit. I just kind of was playing for fun, and then I moved on. I thought originally it was going to be Alice gear, and when I went back in to actually do a little deep dive on it, I realized, I was like, maybe it's like a poorly modeled based on the straps. Perhaps it's a poorly modeled Alice kit, but that's not true because Alice is in the game. Troy Marshall is wearing the Alice kit, as well as I want to say that Adler is as well, and it's modeled pretty well, even with the metal buckles and everything. Now, the packs they're wearing look like DCU Alice magazine pouches, but I don't know if those really existed. So Alice is in the game, so this had to be something else. Well, upon closer examination and a little bit of expanding of my third eye, I realized that it's actually based off of an LBV-88 style of split chest rig. If you don't know what this is, this was used a little bit in Panama, used a little bit in the Gulf War, and then enhanced in the mid-90s, used in Kosovo and in Bosnia as well. And I just got one because my brother got me one for Christmas, which was pretty cool. Everybody say thanks, Espo's brother, for the LBV-88. You can tell by the width of the shoulder straps, that you can tell by a strap that comes across the chest here, and then the mesh and the mag pouches, even that the belt is being held up by the chest rig as well. They've taken some interesting styling choices because the mag pouches look like they're a mix between chocolate chip and multicam. It looks really strange. There's promotional artwork out there of Troy Marshall wearing it, and it got criticized from day one because it was like, why is he wearing multicam in the 90s? As well as the Car 15 he's holding has a weird piece of weaver rail sticking through the carry handle, but this isn't a gun video, I digress. So the LBV-88 was also made by Natick Labs in 1988, and the original version had mag pouches that were at the 90-degree point, and then the fabric that was holding it all together was like a more solid material. I think it was Cordura and nylon is what it was made of, and it was pretty solid fabric, and it was found that it was not breathable. So they ended up going to the mesh version, and then they took those magazine pouches, and instead of being straight up, they canted them out 45 degrees. That's the one that you usually will find if you look up LBV-88. It's harder to find those earlier ones. That's what they should have used in the game. So what they're wearing in the game appears to be a mix of both. The magazine pouches look like they're at the 90-degree point, but the material that's holding them looks like mesh. So they've kind of took a blend of the two and made it their own thing with some stylistic choices. Now, as far as the individual gear that these guys have attached to their split chest rig and to their belt, this was a little more confusing because I initially would have assumed that, oh, it's just gonna be Alice stuff, you know, whatever. But you gotta remember who's making these games now. It's not for guys like you and me. It's not guys like you and me making these games. You have to put yourself in that mindset of a LA lesbian who works for Activision, who's tasked with sourcing gear to scan into the game. So you look up Alice gear and I'm like, okay, what kind of backpack is this? I look up Alice pack. Okay, I don't have an Alice pack. So I'm not entirely, like I could tell if I see one, I'd be like, oh, that's probably an Alice pack. And that's what I kind of thought initially looking at the game, but then I actually looked at photos of it and I was like, okay, that's not an Alice pack. That's something completely different. I looked up the manual, I looked up both the LBV manual and the Alice manual, and I couldn't find a backpack that looked like the one that Delta has in the game. So I said, all right, it's time to pretend to be that lesbian in LA. And I just looked up Army Surplus Backpack, green. When I did that, I pretty much found it immediately. And what it was, I found a website that said something like NATO Assault or NATO Rucksack Backpack, and I couldn't find the nation of origin. So then I looked up, you know, okay, let's look up NATO Rucksack Backpack. Looked around and I ended up finding a West German Bundeswehr pack. So it's a West German Bundeswehr pack, and I can tell because of the way that the pouches are, the way that they're buckled onto the backpack. So you got two large cylindrical pouches on the sides, and then you have two knapsacks, I don't know the words for them, that are held by two straps each. And that's exactly what they have in game. There's also a weird thing on top of the backpack. It's like two parallel lines of something. I don't know what it is in the game, but the actual Bundeswehr pack has two rows of material that maybe they were trying to model. I don't know. I think they took some stylistic choices, but the pack that I found to be the most correct would have been that Bundeswehr pack, which is an odd choice, but I figured they were like, nobody's gonna know. NATO pack, NATO gear's NATO gear, we'll throw it on Delta. Now looking at the pouches is kind of interesting because it's mostly Alice US gear, but there seems to be, again, a little bit of stylistic creativity added to it. So you do see the triple mag pouches with the plastic buckles. So you see that on there. Some of the troops, like some of the guys that are wounded, have a compass pouch on their left shoulder and then a Fulton flashlight on the right. But the main guy, Lieutenant Colonel Bannon, he doesn't have that. And then you see two mag pouches side by side that don't look like a US pouch I've ever seen. So I put myself in that lesbian mindset and I said, okay, let's look up Army pouches. And then Army surplus pouches is what I looked up. Because if you just look up Army pouches, you're gonna get 100,000 Mali, whatever, Chinese stuff. So I was like, okay, I gotta throw surplus in there. And again, I found it almost instantly. And I found a DPM double mag pouch used by the British. I think it's that because of the way that the stitching looks on the mag pouch, and that the way that the fasteners kind of close the whole thing together. It looks like there's some sort of plastic material, some kind of weird buckle system that is being utilized. So again, it looks like it's a little bit stylized, but that is the closest pouch that I could find. It being two of them as well, I kind of thought, okay, that's probably what it is. One thing I did forget to mention is also a 1911 holster of some kind. I couldn't really identify it on the LBV right here, which I think is that's not really how the LBV's set up, but whatever. And as far as the rest of the gear that I could find, the sun, dust, and wind goggles, these were popular during the Gulf War. You see guys wearing them all the time. It was to keep out, surprisingly, sun, dust, and wind. Apparently, I called them Earth, Wind, and Fire goggles in my Black Ops video, and guys, veterans were like, "Oh, we actually called them that." So I think that's pretty funny. It's like the ancestors like smile upon me as I call it the same meme name that they called it, 30 years ago. They're also wearing some black fingerless knit gloves, a G-Shock watch, and a knit cap, a little black knit cap, which are a dime a dozen. You can find those things anywhere. And of course, finishing off with the gun, they're all equipped with Colt 723s. They appear to be 16-inch barrels. That's just what they modeled it after, but they are C7 uppers and everything. So the guns were pretty accurate, although I wanted to see more carry handle mounted optics, maybe a couple tan guns, some Ops Inc suppressors maybe, and then those flashlights that Larry Vickers carried when he was hunting scuds in the desert.